Okay, we are recording.
Yeah, I see it on my end that we're recording. So, are we good to go, Kristen?
We are.
All right, very good. Hi, everyone. My name is Tim Johnson, and I call this regular meeting of the Measurex Citizen Oversight Committee to order. We're conducting this meeting by teleconference and is being recorded. The agenda for this meeting is on the city's website at www.santa-ana.org. Members of the public will have an opportunity to address the Measurex Citizen Oversight Committee regarding agenda and also non-agenda items during the public comment section of this meeting. Even though we're not physically meeting together this evening, please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance wherever you are. All right, ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, excellent. Staff, will you please call the roll for us?
Hernandez is excused. Cargosian?
Here.
Lewis?
Here.
Lugo?
Here.
Pereira?
Here.
Vice Chair Landaverdi?
Here.
Chair Johnson?
I'm here.
We have a quorum.
All right, excellent. Well, it's great to see everyone and some new faces on my Zoom screen here. But so this is the time and place for the public to comment on agenda and also non-agenda type items. Staff, do we have any members of the public who may wish to speak on an agenda item?
We do not.
All right. And so I think now we will go to our agenda, which our next agenda item is the number 1, which is the consent calendar, which only has one item on it, and that's the approval of the minutes from the September 8th meeting.
Tim, I'm sorry, it's Kristen. We just had a guest join that I'm going to admit. So you may want to back up a minute there. They're still joining.
That's fine.
I don't know, they're hung up maybe. It's not joining on their end.
Okay. Well, if they do join in.
Yeah, they did not connect for some reason. I'm sorry.
I can see it.
Yeah, I can see their icon as well.
Oh, yes, I do see it.
Yeah, so since we do have a newly joined person, I'm going to back up and say that this is the time and place for a public comment, for the public to comment on agenda and non-agenda type items, especially since we have a new person that just joined us. Do we have any members of the public who wish?
Yes. Is this the time to address the committee for public comment?
Yes, sir. This is it.
Okay. So I can start, correct?
Yes, you have the floor. Go ahead.
My name is Alexis Teodoro. I am a director at the Tenayuca Labor Project. We're a immigrant and workers' rights organization in Orange County, and we have our office here in Santa Ana. And what we do, part of our work is that we detect and investigate what in California is called wage theft. Wage theft is when an employer violates the California Labor Code and steals wages of workers. So in the city of Santa Ana, there's always has been an overemphasis of certain crimes, like property crimes, for example, but there's not an emphasis ever on labor code crimes. And that is what Wage Shift is about. So the comment that I'm providing today is sort of to implant an idea, because when we think about using funds that are raised as revenues here in the city of Santa Ana and where to invest them, I do agree with law enforcement. However, the type of law enforcement that I would like for you to think about is on the lack of enforcement of the collection of stolen wages in the city of Santa Ana under the pandemic. I would like to point to you that currently we are investigating and tracking wage theft, and we have detected wage theft at several workplaces in the city, particularly one restaurant named Casa Oaxaca, which is on First Street. We are currently pending court judgments against the previous owner of that restaurant because our members are still owed over $10,000. So that's kind of the context that I want to provide to you, so you can be aware that you should be investing in organizations that investigate these types of issues, because the state doesn't have enough resources to sort of, for example, deal with the issue of wage shift in the city of Santa Ana. We just want to also to inform you that wage shift impacts not just the worker, it impacts the entire family and the children, and it contributes to poverty. So please consider creating programs, particularly grant programs, where organizations like ours or that dedicate to issues like the ones that we do are able to actually creatively reinvest revenues from the city in a way that actually makes a difference in people's lives. So that's kind of what my comment is about, because I realize that a lot of people may not participate in commenting, but there are a lot of pressing issues in the community, particularly the issue of workers getting their wages stolen under the pandemic. It's a major issue, but it's not really investigated. So thank you for your time. I appreciate the space, and I will continue to monitor the way that this committee proposes how to invest revenues, because our communities are facing a lot of issues under the pandemic, even more so. So thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity.
Excellent. For attending and providing your feedback to this group. And I'm also glad that you're able to get on prior to us moving too far along on our agenda. So thank you very much for that. So our next item is item number 1, which is the consent calendar approval of the minutes from the September 8th, 2021 meeting. Does anyone have any edits to those minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve them. All right, hearing no edits, I'll go ahead and make the motion to approve those the consent calendar, and specifically the minutes for that.
I'll second your motion.
Thank you. Staff, can we call the roll?
Bogosian,
Yay.
Lewis,
Yay.
Lugo,
Yay.
Pereira,
Aye.
Vice Chair Landaverdi,
Aye.
Chair Johnson.
That's a yes for me also.
Motion passes.
All right, excellent. So our next agenda item is number 2, which is a Measurex sales tax update from our staff.
Great. Good evening, committee members. Thank you, Chair Johnson. Actually, this will be, I'll be introducing Mr. Fran Mancia from Avenue Insights. He's the city sales tax consultant this evening. He's going to give us our annual update to the committee here regarding the trends for Measurex. Fran, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio. Thank you to the committee for having us once again, Chair Johnson. It's a pleasure to be with you again. You know, when we last met, it was approximately in January of this year. It was certainly a very different time as compared to where we are today in terms of how the pandemic has played out, how the economy is starting to come back in terms of sales tax revenue. It's really been pretty much unprecedented circumstances, and certainly we've been in uncharted territories. I don't think any of us could have expected and predicted the journey that we've gone down. Certainly the good news is we'll look is revenues are doing well. Maybe Laura, we can go to the first slide. What I'd like to do is just start giving a brief overview of how the state is looking, and then we'll hone into more specifics around Measurex. So, really the question is, how's the recovery going for California's taxable sales as a whole? And if you look at the first graph, if we hadn't been through the pandemic, if things had continued without any of those circumstances or bumps in the road, whatever you might like to call it, we would have really had pretty stable average growth of about 4%. So if you look here from fiscal year 1450, the statewide taxable sales in billions was 633.4. And you can see steady growth all the way up to 2021 of 801.5. So, averaged about 4% across the board. Now, the way that actually transpired is the second piece down below. It's the actual taxable sales on a cash basis. As you can see, the change in 14-15 was up about 4.3%. Then it went to 2.6, 2.8, 17-18, it went down. And then in 18-19, we certainly had quite a rise after that period, and then it dropped again in 1920 with the pandemic. And there's a few things in addition to the pandemic hitting at the tail end of 1920 into the 2021 fiscal year. The State Board of Equalization, who administers sales and use taxes for the state, those duties were changed over to the California Department of Tax, Fee, and Administration. So there was an agency change in who was responsible and a restructuring of how that was done. That caused a lot of delays in how the cash was actually paid out and the revenues were paid out in early 2018. And then it really accelerated in the first month of 2019. So you'll see, the basis down 1%, then up 16%, then down 6.9, then again up. It's because of those type of things in addition to the pandemic. But again, we've had steady growth. The real news is we were back to pre-pandemic dollar amounts now, which is something that's pretty remarkable considering what's been taking place over the last 24 months. Laura, can you go to the next one, please? And now this slide I want to focus on just for a minute. This is a month-over-month comparisons of taxable sales on a statewide basis. So, for example, in January of 2021, the revenues were down 2.3% compared to the January of 2020. Then, of course, in February of 2020, we're getting right into the pandemic into March. They were up 13% in comparison, and then March was when the pandemic really hit us. We came back about 50% from where we were in March of 2020 by March of 2021. So we saw a really fast rebound coming out of the pandemic. A lot of that is due to online sales and things like that. And of course, through April, May, and June, you can see the numbers continue to grow pretty dramatically this past year, second quarter of this fiscal year, up 51% over April of 2021 over April of 2020, 31% up in May of 2021 compared to May of 2020, et cetera. And you can see that growth has continued all the way through September, where we're still up 19.6%. So the sales tax revenues are growing very dramatically. Laura, the next one, please. So, if you look at the statewide recovery, as I mentioned, the state is really fully recovered to the level they would have been at had COVID-19 not happened, and the growth would have remained stable at an average of 4%. So, but having said that, what really are the bright spots? And I think clearly the first and foremost is e-commerce. During the pandemic, people were shopping more and more online. AB 147 is the Wayfair decision. This is as a reminder, this was the requirement, came out of a case, Wayfair versus South Dakota, that required all third-party sellers to collect and remit use tax on purchases from out of state on the front end. So prior to that measure going into effect in October of 2019, it was voluntary compliance, and very few people would actually voluntarily comply. The third-party sales numbers are so dramatic that for Amazon, which is the #1 platform used by small sellers, so let's say you're a Susie and you sell bird cages and you're based in Nebraska, you ship it to someone in the city of Santa Ana, the tax is collected on the front end by Wayfair because she's using by Amazon, because she's using their platform. The third-party sellers are generating for Amazon is 45% more revenue than the revenue that's actually coming out of their warehouses across the board. So more than almost double their revenue comes from the online sellers, third-party sellers, and then in their own warehouse locations, which seems pretty amazing when you think of the sheer size of those warehouses. So third-party impact has been very dramatic and really has been very helpful to Measurex revenues. Also, auto sales, new and used, are doing extremely well. And I know that sounds somewhat odd when you drive by a dealership and you see how few cars are actually on a lot, where they're primarily used cars, not a lot of new inventory. We've all heard about the backlog on the chips that go into running cars, but despite all that, car prices are up. Many places are selling cars well over the manufactured suggested retail price, which is pretty unusual. So we're seeing great revenue increases there. The next bullet is drugstores and cannabis in parentheses. We say drugstores because the CDTFA classifies any cannabis sales under drugstores in their broader economic language. So the city of Santa Ana, of course, has revenues from cannabis taxes through your business license, but also you're receiving sales tax, both the Bradley Burns as well as Measurex revenue from your cannabis dispensaries, which is significant as well. You also have a very diverse business space. So your heavy and light industry, we also consider other types of business to business in this category have done extremely well. And apparel has started to come back. People are going out to the retail locations, they're shopping again. They're also buying online, but you're really seeing your apparel stores, your big boxes coming back. And of course, your building materials, wholesale and retail. So your Measurex revenues are strong across all categories. The biggest impact for most during the pandemic was in restaurants, hotels, tourism, things of that nature. But the other segments weren't nearly as affected as dramatically as some folks might have thought during this 24-month period we've been through. So on the next slide, we are looking at your revenues. So for fiscal year 2021, the city received $75.1 million from Measurex revenues. And just for perspective, there are about 300 district taxes levied throughout California. Measurex is one of those. They're also known sometimes as a transaction and use tax category. Again, it's been administered by the CDTFA. And the way the taxes are distributed are a little bit different from how your regular place of sale Bradley Burns revenues are distributed. And we'll put a slide up in just for a moment to provide a brief reminder. So Bradley Burns is the 1% that you would normally receive. It's based on the place of sale. Measurex revenues, you receive 1.5%. It's based on where the product is purchased and or taken ownership of or delivered. So as an example, if a citizen purchased a car in Santa Ana, but is purchased by a non-resident, you would receive the normal Bradley Burns because you have the place of sale, but you would not receive revenue under Measurex for that type of purchase. However, if a vehicle is purchased outside of the city of Santa Ana by a resident, you wouldn't receive the 1%, but you would receive some Measurex revenue. So if someone goes to Costa Mesa, buys a car who's a resident of Santa Ana, you would receive 1% of that purchase price as well. Then goods purchased online by city residents or businesses. This is probably the most important one. Anytime a resident of Santa Ana purchases something online, you'll receive 1.5% of that. Under your other tax, the Bradley Burns, you only receive a portion of it, and it's based on a formula called the countywide pool. So you really benefit from online sales purchases by your residents under Measurex. And then, of course, if someone goes to a restaurant or buys at a local business at the cash register, you're receiving Bradley Burns as well as Measurex. So this really gives you the best of both worlds under Measurex is the main point I wanted to make there. Let's go to the next slide, please. So this is a look at your quarterly Measurex transaction use tax performance by segment. The top line, the brown one, is general retail. And so you can see that in the second quarter of 2021, you received to round it off, 5.4 million revenue. And that was 29% higher than the second quarter of 2020. So you can see it's a pretty remarkable percentage growth. The quarter over quarter dollar change was 1.2 million. Year over year, it's 25.6%. So very large growth. General retail is about 28% of your Measurex money. And so this would include the Amazon, the Wayfair, things of that type under that particular category. The green bar is I can't see it very well on my screen. Oh, that's the business to business. There we are. It was up 29% quarter over quarter, construction up 16.6%, and food products came back 37%. So food products was the category That was probably the most dramatically hit throughout this pandemic. That's where your restaurants would be, your hotels, things of that nature. But you can see the peak still for general retail was back in the 2020 Q4, 2020 Q3 areas. You can see that large peak. You can see the drop that took place as the pandemic came down on the right, and you can see we're starting to come back out of it pretty well. So we had some really dramatic growth during that period, and then we had a slide. But overall, all your categories are up very significantly, as you can see. Next one. So, I want to put just a couple comments in here around inflation. I know that's on a lot of people's mind these days. Obviously, we're seeing price increases and things like that. And the real message here is sales tax doesn't really get impacted by inflation as much as we might think. We put this together. Inflation really is more about the drop in purchasing power of money when the central bank might create more money and do things of that nature. It manifests itself as we rise, as there rise in all prices and wages, but it's really not a factor in sales tax revenue as much as people might think. Relative price changes are very much a major portion of impacts on sales tax revenue. It's really driven by supply and demand, and that really helps convey important information that's useful for making decisions around consumption, production, labor, things of that type. So what we're really looking closely at in this arena is the changing prices. So gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, those are very significant impacts to sales and use tax revenue. Obviously, there's a lot of impact on the shipping costs of taxable goods right now. That's a big deal. So when gas prices are as high as they are today, close to $5 a gallon, depending on where you might be, it's really not good as a consumer. It means we're paying a lot at the pump, but it's good for the tax revenue because you're getting 1.5% on the price per gallon, and that includes whatever the taxable amounts might be. So for sales tax, again, it's really driven by supply and demand. And so we really watch those type of things very closely. And the next slide, I think this is interesting. This is your annual per capita adjusted for inflation and things of that type. And we're basically looking at constant 2017 dollars. And the silo on the left was how we were looking in 2020 Q1. It was about $178 per capita. For the first quarter of 2021, we're up to 185. And if you look at the two silos across from each other, the big area of change is in general retail. It's up from 46 to 55. General retail was down in 2021, and that makes sense because a lot of stores and locations were closed during the pandemic. Transportation is basically the same, and construction and miscellaneous are basically the same as well. So the big driver of increase has been clearly in the general retail. And once again, that includes online sales as the predominant increase driver. So taking that forward to the forecast, this is our most likely forecast amounts that we have before us. So if you can see in fiscal year 2021, the cash projection was $75,094,000. It was an increase of about 21.5%. In fiscal year 21-22, we're going up another 2.9% to $77,263,000. And then the growth goes out, as you can see, 3.6% in 22-23, 23-24, et cetera. So nice, very firm, steady growth going forward into the future. Again, this is our most likely forecast, and we seem to be hitting that pretty well. So I just want to talk a little bit about how interesting it has been to try to forecast revenue over the last 24 months. We put together assumptions every quarter when we meet with city staff. One of the big drivers that took place in this last period of time has really been the funding provided by the federal government. There's almost been $4 trillion put into the economy, which basically is a cash infusion in a lot of ways. I don't think that was expected. We didn't really know who the next president would be until that election took place, how much money would be put in. So that's really driven a lot of the revenue spending that's taken place as well. But back in September of 2020, when we were looking at this, we were still trying to figure out what would unemployment look like in California. We thought it would be 10% or even higher. We were still not sure, were we going into a recession? It's similar to what we saw in 2008 or 9. As it turned out, it wasn't really a full recession. It was more of a correction, is what we're calling it, because it really hit the restaurant, it hits tourism, things like that. It didn't hit the other categories. And as we saw before, your other categories have done extremely well. We just weren't sure back at that time period. In 2020 Q3, we were expecting and saw an 8 to 16% decline across the California, depending on the jurisdiction in terms of their revenues. So some jurisdictions were hit far more severely than others. In your case, your impact was not nearly as bad because you have such a great diverse business base. But rest cities that are based on tourism and things of that nature certainly suffered more than others. We also were looking at a dampened growth from 2021 Q2 through Q4. We were a lot more pessimistic at that time. So, now fast forward to October 18, when we did these assumptions for the last period, unemployment was around 7.5%. So certainly that was better than we thought about a year ago. California employment is 95% of the 2019 average. So that's come back pretty dramatically. And even we partner with UCLA Anderson. They're one of our strategic partners. They're looking at real gross domestic product forecast of being up 5.6% in 2021, 4.1% in 2022, and 3.1% in 2023. So we have positive outlooks as we look forward. And as we talked about earlier, quarter over quarter, California statewide sales tax grew by 32% on a cash basis after dropping almost 19% during the lows of the pandemic in the first quarter of 2020 Q1, and up again in the second quarter of 2021 after declining the period before. So we're seeing robust growth, and the recovery is expected to continue in this fashion. So just in going to the last slide, I think in summary, and I'm certainly happy to answer questions if there might be any. We're really seeing robust growth in sales tax revenue, and we feel that's going to be strong again for the next 2 to 3 years. We always wonder about a recession. Normally, as many of you know, there's every 7 to 10 years, there might be a recession. We're past that time period now. Will there be some sort of correction down the road? The fundamentals look good. That's certainly something that's always weighs in our mind if you look at history, but we're feeling good about the next 2 to 3 years, certainly. We don't feel the city should be overly concerned about the impact of inflation on sales tax revenues. It doesn't really, as I mentioned before, correlate with rates of change in your sales tax revenues. Again, we're more focused on the price changes, gas, fuel, diesel, things of that impact. And again, we're watching them closely, and we're always factoring and meeting each month to look at adjustments to forecast based on what's going on. And we're also seeking out advice from other experts, especially on short-term impacts to sales and use tax revenues. So, all in all, things looking well and growing nicely for the community. Your diverse business space is certainly making a difference. And personally, I think it's really great that you have a transaction use tax measure in place. Many cities don't have the benefit of having the place of sale that you have with Bradley Burns with the diversity that a Measurex provides. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, and I hope this is helpful and happy to answer any questions.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Mr. Rancia. We have some questions from our group here. I want to just call on folks as they kind of see I see them across my screen here. So, Member Perea, do you have any comments or questions for the city's consultant?
Not at the moment.
Okay. And then how about Cargosian? Ms. Cargosian, do you have any comments or questions?
No questions, and I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation. There had been a few things kind of running through my head about how certain things are going to be affecting our city and our sales tax measure, but this really just put a lot of those to rest. So thank you. It was very informative.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
All right, and let's see. Oh boy, I've lost my little view here, so I'm gonna go off of memory here. So how about Member Lewis? Do you have any questions or comments for him?
No questions or comments at this time, and thank you for the presentation.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, and how about Member? Let's see who we have here. Lugo. Member Lugo.
Thank you, Fran. No questions.
Great. Thank you.
All right, and how about Vice Chair Landaverde?
No questions. Just wanted to say thank you. This is very detailed and very much appreciated. So thank you so much.
It's our pleasure.
Oh man, you guys are gonna make me ask all the questions here.
Tim, we know you got the question, so come on.
I remember.
Take one for the team.
And it's very helpful. I mean, I feel like I know probably sometimes in your presentations you feel like you might be covering the same thing, but I actually do appreciate that, because I feel like every time that you reference this stuff that I know you've said before, it's helpful for myself, and so hopefully it's helpful for others also. In terms of the you kind of referenced the statewide recovery efforts, or recovery of the sales tax. How is Santa Ana fared better or fared worse in terms of that your chart where you go through the 4% growth from 14-15 to present versus the actual statewide? Is Santa Ana kind of been have we fared better or fared worse just overall?
So that's a great question. That the broad slide, we use that on purpose just because it incorporates everyone. I'd say as a whole, you would perform better. And the reason is you're not reliant in one particular segment, Mr. Chair. So for example, cities on the coast were suffered, or a high tourism city in the North Bay, for example, such as San Francisco, has suffered dramatically because conventions stopped, tourists didn't come to town, ships didn't come to town, things of that nature. So it really was focused in the entertainment and tourism area. Because you're so diverse, you've done well. But interesting, the places that had the least amount of impact, maybe to take it a different way, is the Central Valley, because they're a little more focused on agriculture. They're not really focused on tourism and things of that nature. A lot of their products are, industrial or food based. And so they were probably the most stable, but you grew more dramatically again, because you have a 1.5% measure, certainly, but because you have very solid fundamentals in your other categories. So you performed better. I hope that helps answer it a little bit.
Yeah, it sure does. And then on that same slide with the growth, I know you're starting with a 14-15 kind of baseline. Is there a reason for a 14-15 baseline? Because obviously, like for example, if we were to start with 17-18 or 18-19, it would be pretty dramatically different because the growth rates haven't been those 4%. Is there a kind of a key in your industry that you're using 14-15?
Yeah, we went back that far mainly for several reasons. One, just to try to show how consistent with all that ups and downs that we went. Oh, here we go. Thank you, Laura. It was more just because it just shows over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year period, which is, we normally run with 7-year periods in our blocks, mainly because it fits, but it seems to show the cycles well. So that's really why it was done that way. You're right. And that was the other reason, because so many unusual things happened in 18-19 with the CDTFA changes. It would really skew it. And what we're trying to show, that's fairly stable. We were down and we're up, but a lot of it had to do with delays and payments being paid to you. So your revenues on a cash basis looked down when in fact your economy was going the same way, but there was deferrals and transitions. So it was really to illustrate the consistency more than anything, and also to help explain why are you down 1% in 17-18, all of a sudden up 16% in 18-19, then down again 6.9. That's not economic reflection. It's more the state going through their implementation changes of their systems. To help clarify that that's not the actual activity in terms of dollars.
Right, that was the actual collection and
payment
for remittances to the municipalities. Okay. How does, and I'm not sure if I've asked this question before or not, but how does Measurex play into like a gallon of gasoline? When we pay at the pump, but obviously all the taxes are included in the gallon of gas. But as the price of gas goes up, is it a per gallon basis, or is it still a percentage basis of the cost of a gallon of gas?
Yeah, it's the latter. It's a percentage of the cost. So if the gas is $1 a gallon, you would be collecting 1.5%. If it's $2 a gallon, it's reflective on the total dollars. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but the city receives more revenue as prices are up, and so does the state and others who receive tax. So it's tax. It's a percentage just like any other product based on the total sale cost.
All right. So I mean, fortunately for the city, as gasoline goes up, we collect more. That means that the residents, all of us, are paying for that. Because I think some taxes is that the federal taxes that are on a per gallon basis, but this is not. This is still strictly a percentage of
correct.
basis.
Correct. And then it's also added, any of these state taxes that are collected as part of that per gallon price, you're getting tax on all of that as well. So.
Okay. And on the slide that had the silos on
Yes.
it, I thought it was very interesting. And so this is on a per capita basis. And so if my math is right here, so we've got an average resident of San, and I'm assuming, yeah, it looks like this is Santa Ana. So an average resident first quarter 2020 was paying $178 per resident, whereas first quarter of 2021, $185. And so we've gone up about $7, which is about 4%. My math is right, but this is solely Measurex. So, every resident, you got 3 residents in the household. Your contribution to the city has gone up, what, 500 and some odd dollars. And there's that. Am I reading that right? Is that?
Yeah, and I think what it tells us also that people are spending more in the first quarter of 2021 than they were a year ago in 2020. And a lot of it has to do, people are purchasing online back in 2020, but now they're out in the city, they're out going out to dinner or going to to shop at the malls and things. I also think the federal infusion of cash has had a major impact across the country. Obviously, 4 trillion is a lot of revenues that's gone out. So also the interesting sidebar is that savings rates have increased throughout the, people who are receiving stimulus checks and things were saving. We did some analysis separate from here on that, and savings rates were up, but people are spending, but they're saving a lot of it, but spending some of it too, which was interesting to see.
Yeah, well, I always say that, society, I want everyone to spend all their money, but individually as a family, I want my family to save all of our money. But so good that we have both of that happening in society, of both the saving, which is good individually, as well as spending, which is good for the economy in general. So it's great. All right. Well, I think that was that covered my questions for you. I really do appreciate your presentation here, and on behalf of all the committee, I think it's very helpful, and hopefully anyone that is watching outside or comes back to this also finds it helpful too.
Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members. Pleasure to be with you tonight. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. So our next item on the agenda is item number 3, which is a Measurex revenue update. And I think that's with Assistant Director Vidal. Is that you?
Yes, that's correct. Chair Johnson, thank you very much. Good evening, committee members. Sergio Vidal, Assistant Director here with the city, and just kind of continuing that positive news regarding the city sales tax. Here today to provide the update for this most recently completed quarter for the current fiscal year 21-22. Next slide, please. So again, as Mr. Mencia mentioned, there was a lot that he provided to us information-wise regarding the set Measurex, but I think really the positivity is continuing, and we'll get into the quarter-over-quarter comparison in the next slide. However, just for the current quarter, that most recently completed quarter, and that's the period July through September, the city received $20.9 million in Measurex sales tax. Obviously, as we're now, this is our 3rd year of Measurex revenue. We still get a little bit trickling in from the prior year. So we did receive about $2.2 million from prior year. And then that's again attributed to many things, but mainly late filings, extensions, and so forth. But again, this is a real positive news, and where the city still continuing to see that impact of that Wayfair decision, that court decision related to online sales, and of course over the continuing high performance of our e-commerce sales within the city. Next slide, please. So again, this is really, how we're looking at it is rather than month by month, because of the way CDTFA, the taxing agency, provides the money. They typically provide an advance to the city in the first month of the quarter, and then subsequently they'll go ahead and true it up based on the filings for that period. So really, how we're approaching it here as staff here at the city is looking at it from a quarter by quarter basis. And so when we compare the prior year quarter, which was a great quarter last year, we're still up about 2.5 million. And again, we're seeing that high performance with or outperforming e-commerce sales is one of the Wayfair decision. But we're really going to crunch those numbers once we obtain that data from our consultants, from Mr. Mencia and Ms. Burnett, in the next coming weeks as we go detail as we were previously presented on which exact categories or which categories of sales tax are really outperforming. Is it that continued? Obviously, general retail, which includes e-commerce. How is gas products, business to business, so forth. So we're really definitely looking into anxiously waiting that data to determine what exactly is the cause of this continued increase on a quarter-over-quarter basis today. Next slide, please. So again, real quick, as everyone's aware, for the current fiscal year 21-22, the Measurex sales tax budget is 65 million. So obviously that's a stale estimate at this time. That estimate was provided in May and June of this calendar year. So we're prepared to go to council and provide them that revised estimate based on the information we've received through the quarter 2 of the current year. So our current information, we're looking to increase that substantially in that between 75 and 80 million, right around 77 million. But that projection will be provided to city council for consideration. However, that projection included an estimate of a lower than anticipated quarter. So we're still, this information continues to be dynamic. So I wanted to kind of caution and provide that additional information that in February, when we go back to council for our mid-year, we may be adjusting that estimate based on the data we are receiving or based on the actuals we've received today. And by then, we'll not only see we'll have the receipts for both November and January. So we'll have a better idea of where exactly we will be landing about 6-7 months out of the year completed, where we're going to be landing for this current fiscal year. So definitely we're looking to change that estimate. We're hoping to continue that reporting out that positive news regarding the city sales tax, Measurex sales tax revenue. And that concludes my presentation. Now I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Sergio. So we'll do a walk around for any questions. Also, Member Perea.
No questions from me at the moment. Thank you, Alonso, for the report. Sorry, Sergio.
And have a Member Cargozia.
No, just a comment, I guess. If my memory serves me correctly, our projections usually show like the increase a little bit during the holiday season. I am a little curious to see if we'll still see that, or if like the supply chain stuff that we're hearing about will have any kind of impact on that. But it sounds like we're still in a very good position. And from the previous presentation, it doesn't sound like we have much to worry about with their projections as well. So it'll be curious to see what ends up happening after the holidays.
Most definitely, we'll be receiving that information, remember, regarding the holidays. So that's really quarter 4 of this calendar year. We'll be receiving that information for this period by March of next year. Given the 2-month lag, if you will. So, but yeah, definitely, we're going to see what is the impact. Hopefully, people are shopping online and continue that positive effect in the city sales tax.
Excellent. And Member Lewis.
No questions or comments at this time. Thank you very much for the presentation.
And Member Lugo.
Yeah, thank you. Sergio, quick question for you. So taking into account some of the information that was previously provided by the last presentation, 75.1 million for 2021 is healthy. Just a question, we have been expecting about 60 million per year through this Measurex. At this time, do we anticipate a clip of 70, 75 year over year over these next 3 to 5 years?
That's a great question. Right now, we're just we're determining, this is, first of all, it's a new tax, right? For the city, but also we were in a pandemic. So we're unsure right now if consumer behavior has changed. Are folks going to be going back to brick and mortars? And if they do, in terms of their general retail, are they going to be shopping in Santa Ana versus neighboring cities? So right now, obviously that leakage, if you will, which is a term of, residents going outside of the city for purchase for various general retail purposes. If that occurs, then we may see a change, obviously, or an impact, if you want, on our sales tax. But right now, if you look out the horizon, especially with this recent economic forecast, and we don't think inflation, as Mr. Mencia mentioned, is going to impact our Measurex sales tax too dramatically due to the diversity within the sales tax base. However, if consumer behavior does permanently change or materially change in terms of that focus on e-commerce, then we definitely may see that new baseline go up from 60 to 70, as you mentioned. For right now, I think really the best case right now is hold on, wait for us to get out of the pandemic, and then as we kind of go forward, we can analyze the data and we can see is consumer behavior patterns, are they stabilizing, or have they really permanently changed? So we're looking to hopefully we get that answer in the near future.
I appreciate your comments on that. I will say, just from experience, dealing with my parents and my in-laws and some of my aunts and uncles, from my perspective, at least in my circle, I have people in my life asking me to buy them things through online, and them getting accustomed to using their own phones to buy things online more so than ever before. So I do think the pandemic has kind of kickstarted a little, wave that has permanently changed culture, especially in my family. Yeah, so we'll see.
We'll definitely want honors to that, and we'll probably put you in as a footnote as well for your consumer behaviors.
There you go. Thank you.
Well,
All right, perfect. Thanks for that, Alonzo. And then how about Vice Chair Landaverde?
No comments for me. Thanks for the update, Sergio.
Perfect. Hey, Sergio, and this may just be a just terminology, but so on the first quarter in the current fiscal year, so that July to September period, which is 20.8 million, and then we have a year-over-year comparison, which looks like it's year to date fiscal year November 21, so that'd be fiscal year to date, and that's the exact same number. So is that July through November on your kind of your second slide, of which shows the 20,869,000 for July to November versus last year? Is that help me understand you got three months on the prior slide, and then that one, it looks like it's 5 months.
Yeah, so what that's referring to is the reporting period is July through September, and the cash is received September through November. So basically it's the quarter. There's a 2-month lag, if you will, for that period. So I think so I apologize for the confusion, but that's in essence what I was trying to reflect is a reporting period, but also the cash receipt period. So when we receive those revenues from in the months of September through November, it's reflective of the most recently completed quarter, if you will, reporting period quarter, which is July.
Got it.
September.
Okay, perfect. And what was the total? And I think you said this, and I just missed it. What was the estimate in our current fiscal year for Measurex budget?
So upon council adoption, the city council adopted for the current fiscal year 21-22, 65 million. So 65 million even.
And what are we in the current budget, did we utilize the general fund balance to, I forget if that's the term of it, but essentially in the corporate world, it'd be a retained earnings, but in the best general fund above the minimum required, are we utilizing that to be able to balance the budget?
Previously, upon the adoption of the budget, you are correct. To close the gap between operating revenues and operating expenditures, we utilize fund balance, right, to retain earnings. However, with these new estimates relating to both our Measurex and other revenue estimates, we're now anticipating closing that gap, if you will, between operating revenues and expenditures. And a large part of that is the increase in Measurex revenue from 65 to about 77, 78 million.
What was the budget adoption usage of the fund balance?
Budget adoption was
12.6 million.
All right, so we're still 12.6 million, and if Measurex is 10 million higher, 65, let's just call it 75. So that it's not like the city is going to have that much extra cash to spend. It's I mean, I guess we could, but it's really just reducing the amount of the fund balance that we have to use to essentially balance the budget for the year. Is that
absolutely correct
about that, right?
You're absolutely correct. Yes, and then we have some other higher performing revenues as well to offset that use of fund balance, that budget gap, if you will.
Okay, excellent. I think that is all of my questions for you. Unless anyone else has anything that popped in their mind, we'll go ahead and move on and seeing no one jumping up and down. Okay, so then our next item is item number 4, which is our Measurex agreed upon procedures report, which our folks from CLA have been patiently waiting. So we'll let them take it away.
Thank you, committee. Thank you, Chair Johnson. I'm happy to introduce to you Ms. Daphne Munoz, shareholder with CLA, Clifton Larson Allen, our independent auditor. Ms. Munoz is here to present the results of the Measurex agreed upon procedures or audit for the current most recently completed fiscal year 2021. Ms. Munoz, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Again, my name is Daphne Munoz, and I am a principal at Clifton Larson Allen, and I'm here tonight to present our results on our examination report on the management's assertion related to Measurex. Next slide, please. Just a brief background on our firm. So we are a national firm. We currently are 8th in nationally, and this engagement is serviced from our Irvine office, and our Irvine office focuses on audits of local governments. We are also the financial statement auditors for the city of Santa Ana for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2020. For the scope of our engagement related to Measurex, we have examined the management's assertion regarding the accompanying schedule of Measurex revenues and expenditures for the fiscal year ended 2021, and this complied with the requirements of Measurex ballot language. Next slide, please. So for the year ended June 30, 2020, as mentioned before a while ago, the total Measurex revenues were 75.1 million, and Measurex uses and expenditures for the fiscal year is 61.4 million, which leaves about 13.4 million excess. And of that, 3.5 is being used for carryovers for commitments that have been entered at the end of the year, but just have not been expended as of June 30. And that leaves about approximately 10 million addition to general fund reserves. And lastly, next slide, please. So our examination does not provide a legal determination of the city's compliance with the requirements. However, in our opinion, the management assertion that the accompanying schedule for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2022, that they comply with the requirements with the ballot Measurex ballot language is fairly stated in all material respects. And really, that concludes my brief presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you for that, Ms. Munoz. Appreciate the work that you and your group has done there, and I'm sure you got your hands full with all of your fiscal year audits also. So we'll go ahead and do a walk around and see if anyone has any questions. So Member Perea.
I'll go towards the end.
Okay. Member Cargosian,
No questions.
followed by Member Lewis
No questions at this time.
and Member Lugo.
I feel like I'm the only one talking now. Okay, I do have a question for you, Daphne. So you said 10 million was being added to the general fund reserve. Is that something that you know, or you're being told by the city?
That's just based on the schedule that was provided to us. So with the 75 out of the 75.1 million, 61.4 were identified as uses of Measurex, that which
Right.
leaves about 13.7. And again, 3.5 of that is for there are some carryovers, there are some commitments at the end of the year that have been entered into that will be used for 21-22. And then which leaves about 10 million, and that the management's assertion is that is being added to the general fund reserves.
Okay, so maybe this question is for Director Downs and the city. Is there a general way of adopting that money and increasing our reserve or our emergency limit?
I could
this-
take that. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. If you want to, go ahead.
No, it's okay.
All right. So City Council adopted a policy reserve that says that we're supposed to keep 18% of our revenues on hand for rainy day fund. We are closing the year of fiscal year 2021 with an amount far in excess of that policy reserve requirement. A contribution to that excess is that 10 million that you've identified and that Daphne talked about. So as part of our first quarter report that we're bringing to City Council on December 21st, it currently in its draft form, we plan on making some recommendations to City Council for the use of that excess reserve, if you will. And some of the items that we have in recommendation, how should I say it? They line up with Measurex ballot measure language. So for instance, one of the categories in the ballot language is fixing streets, right? Well, we have some items on our recommendation list that falls into fixing streets. So that's how we're trying to make sure that the money that was generated by Measurex gets spent on those ballot categories, if you will, which of course shows up in our next annual report that you'll receive a year from now.
Director Downs, so when you said it's significantly above, what does that number sound like, or percentage wise? If we're at 18% per City Council, what do we actually sit at today?
Well, the financial statements haven't been actually published yet, and then I would be letting you have information before my City Council.
Okay.
So I'm not going to let that cat out of the bag just yet.
Okay. Is one of the recommendations that's going to be going to the City Council above and beyond that which you already have mentioned include increasing our emergency limits and reserve?
No, we did a risk assessment when we proposed that to the City Council for adoption, the 18%. And we found that based on that risk assessment, that 18% was a good place to be. So as our revenues grow, that reserve is going to grow because it's always supposed to be 18% of our annual revenues.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Alonzo, and Vice Chair Landaverde.
No questions. Thanks, Daphne.
Perfect, thank you. So, I think from day one, I've had a, kind of a little issue with just what we're really looking at and what your group, Daphne, what your group is really opining on. And so, and I don't expect you to provide any feedback on this, but if there's any way that your group can find a way to be able to, and I'm sure you probably do this just in your general audit, but it feels like we're just checking a box here, and because you're essentially just saying that, hey, the management's assertions seem to be okay, and but that doesn't. I'm not sure that it really provides a whole lot of information to the public. That how is the money being spent? Is it being spent upon in the right areas? And again, kind of goes back to the whole general fund issue versus specified fund issues. So I don't know if there's anything that, again, I'm not suggesting that you opine on that, right, or give any information on that right now, but encourage your group if there's something that you can maybe help provide the city to and the residents to where, hey, what's happening with this money in a little bit more depth that might be helpful. I know, Kat, your group does a great job of trying to do that, and you're struggling with that also on what especially every year that goes along, we get further and further away from a kind of a baseline. But if there's anything that CLA can help with that on that, I would be interested in hearing about that. I'm sure others might be also, but I know it's something that Kat and Sergio, your group is, I think, looking into also. So no question there, and I'm not going to have you comment on it because I've been in your spot before, and that'd be tough to do. So, yeah. Kat, I did have one question for you. That when Alonzo was talking about the reserve and kind of thinking about the further down the road, we go with the 18%, and when we start having sunsets on this, that's going to be a significant drop in our reserve requirements at that point. So obviously it doesn't fall to zero. We have that it goes from 1.5 to 1 and then to 0, I think, after a certain period of time. But I mean that's a pretty significant amount, of reserve change when we start sunsetting it. And I'm curious if there's been any thought in terms of reserve policies when we're going through that change to where the reserve is mathematically going to be smaller because our revenue has been dropped.
So you have a good point, and we have thought about that. So for example, let's say that come 2029, our annual Measurex revenue is just, I'll use a round number, 80 million. The 18% of that it becomes the reserve policy is 14.4 million. So that 14.4 million, when Measurex sunsets, I think that we're going to need a, how shall I say, like landing strip, a couple year transition period to make some of those choices to peel back on service levels. Because what ended up happening during this time period is we increased service levels. Mm-hmm. And so when 0.5% of Measurex goes away, ergo, we're going to have to reverse that course. We're going to have to decrease service levels. And we know how popular that's going to be with both the city council and the public. It's not. And so we're going to need some additional funds, and likely that 14.4 million theoretical nexus to help smooth the transition over a couple of years.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I think that makes sense. That essentially you're utilizing that additional reserve that's freed up to be able to lessen the hit in 1 year and spread that out. Okay.
Right.
All right. Perfect. And I would just, as things are finalized and that, that excess reserve is kind of figured out based upon the financials and recommendations for use of that, kind of go back to our annual reports and, emphasizing, the dangers of having annual recurring expenditures being taken into account as opposed to one-time expenditures, which I know we've talked about many times. And we're just a recommending body, but I think that probably still stands for this group. I'm sure
and as the CFO of the city, I completely agree with you. And my report in its current draft form very clearly bifurcates this as a one-time resource. And so our recommended plan for it is all one time. There is a little bit of a swing. So you talked about the 12.6 million use of the general fund balance, of the excess general fund balance as a one-time use to protect service levels for the current budget year. That was what was adopted. And our revenue estimates are going up. So that's actually going to swing the other way slightly. And so, the staff report, like I said, in its current form, very much bifurcates between the one-time resource and one-time spending and ongoing resources and ongoing spending.
Excellent. Perfect. Well, I think that is it for, I'm sorry, Member Perea, I think I wanted to come back to you. Did you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. No, my questions are more relevant for the next section.
Okay, perfect. So I think that moves us on along to agenda item number 5 on the Measurex annual report of revenue and expenditures. And so I'll let you take it away. And before we do that, thank you very much to our CLA group. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Sergio, just let me know what page you want up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Director Johnson. If you could, page 3 of the report. And again, thank you, Sergio Vidal, Assistant Director here with the city, discussing, happy to present for you the annual report of revenue expenditures for fiscal year ended June 30th, 2021. Again, just a couple of new things as Ms. Munoz highlighted, the opinion that was provided. What we did something a little different this year is we touched on a little earlier, or prior meetings, I should say, that in order to better identify what exactly the spending is being spent on by departments, we created those new cost centers, if you will, that were dedicated for Measurex funding. And of course, that's where we had those big picture or big contract items such as CalPERS increases, annual increases, CalPERS, Orange County Fire, or fire contract, care ambulance or emergency transport, and other big ticket items, some new, such as the vehicle incentive program for city residents, and so forth. But another thing is we wanted to put pen to paper, if you will, and really with that was, in essence, demonstrate and also articulate what exactly is our methodology. So really what we're taking is what we created and we passed that over to our audit team here, is developing a methodology for Measurex funding, where we in essence are looking at it from this perspective. In 18-19, which was the first budget, the last budget that was adopted without Measurex, we consider that our base year. And then going forward, every year going forward, so for currently fiscal year 2021, we make a comparison between the current year and our base year 18-19. And that's really how we arrive at determining what are exactly our spending for Measurex in the current year, that increase, if you will. So we went ahead and took a look at those cost centers, see where there was increases throughout, and established that reporting mechanism in order for us to better report out to the committee and the public really what our expenses were for the fiscal year. And we also made some other enhancements, if you will, no pun intended. We call it the service enhancement, our accounting unit, or our cost centers, where we actually wanted to provide the committee and our residents a lookout of what the city has collected in Measurex revenue, and versus what it's expended on a year-over-year basis. So obviously, as we go forward in the future, and we'll be reporting that on an annual basis, what is those expenditures year over year. But here, as we start on Measurex revenue, our first page, just as similar as indicated, the city last year, or fiscal year 2021, we did receive $75.1 million in Measurex revenue. Again, positive story, and we provided that information there, indicating what was the revenues received on a month-by-month basis. So just a quick synopsis here, we indicated the reporting period. For the month of July, we received 5.6, and obviously for the reporting period in June, 7.7. So you definitely see that increase from the beginning of the year to the current year. Now, obviously, we do have some different activity during the year. We don't receive sales tax evenly throughout the year, but that's just a perspective to give you an idea of how that rises revenue for the city. Next page, please. So again, we started with a $340 million budget for the upcoming year, just to kind of give you an idea, or for the current year, I should say, and where we ended at. But I think really, I provided this slide to also, it's a segue to kind of look back and how we performed in the prior fiscal year in 2021. So as Ms. Munoz alluded to, the city has identified $61.4 million in program expenses that are Measurex related. And we'll go to Measure Exhibit 1 for the detail behind that. But really, and that is really where the detail is lined by ballot category of what exactly those expenses are. In addition to the 61.4, as mentioned earlier, 13.7 million is added to our reserves. So when you take the identified spend plus the additional reserves, that's how we arrive at the total amount that was received versus what it was used for. And again, I think the main expenses for the city's Measurex identified spending were unrestricted general revenue purposes, approximately 23.7 million. The largest category obviously is addressing those prior year deficits. So if we go back to fiscal year 18-19, we had some challenges obviously, and that is why the city decided to take that leap forward and put before the voters that ballot measure. And really, we had a $10.2 million deficit at that time going into the fiscal year. In addition to that, we had a $1.5 billion of saving of projected cuts in employee compensation. And we also had some cannabis revenue shortfall. So that is, those were the challenges, if you will, in 18-19, which were definitely alleviated by Measurex revenue. And that's an ongoing cost or ongoing increase in service level, if you will, as we move forward in the upcoming years. Another large item from the unrestricted general revenue purpose category is 1.3 million in subsidies for our transit station here for the city. As we're all aware, the city's embarking, or the county is, if you will, is embarking on that streetcar. So definitely the city through its part is trying to definitely increase the viability, the visibility, if you will, of its transportation. And so the general fund or identified measure spending to the tune of 1.3 million for the city's train station. Vehicle incentive program, not sure if a lot of residents, if anyone on this call has participated in that, but as previously mentioned by Mr. Mencia, we are definitely seeing those car sales. And it's about $900,000 that we've issued in vehicle incentive programs. So I think really what that tells us is probably a lot of folks may or may not be taking advantage of that offer, but that is something that was expended this year. Again, another $800,000 in some debt service for the city's purchase of our streetlights. And finally, some other programs and services that we're doing to the tune of 1.4 million, mainly attributed to some business retention rebates to local businesses. Next page, please.
Hey, Sergio, I apologize for interrupting, but may I ask a question right now?
Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to ask a dumb question, but we're talking about revenue. I'm seeing the graph. I'm seeing the dollar amount in the page 3 of the report. Remind me, how is the American Rescue Plan funds coming in from the federal government accounted for?
It's a great question. So the Revive Santa Ana plan is funded by those funds that you're mentioning, the ARPA funds or American Rescue Plan Act. Those funds are not reflected here at all. So that's basically in a separate fund category, if you will. It's a special revenue. Those funds are not in the general fund. So you don't see any of that spending in any of the documents or the presentation this evening. However, I will state that in upcoming council meetings, city council staff will be reporting the progress on that the Revive Santa Ana or that ARPA plan funding.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And this right here is a summary by category here, by ballot category of the expenditures for the current or the prior fiscal year 2021. And I think really Councilmember or Committee Member Lugo mentioned his ARPA funding, but I also want to recall that the city also was in receipt of about $31 million in both state and county funding related to the CARES Act in its response to COVID-19, and it had a dramatic impact on the city's general fund. So even though you may not see the direct expenditures here in this presentation, what is being reflected is the reduced spending by the general fund for COVID-19, and specifically, those are one of the attributes or one of the variables into why the city's general fund was able to provide at least 13.6 million additions to its reserves. And that main category, what we saw is $7.1 million in CARES Act expenditures or public safety expenditures, specifically for our police department and our fire department, our Orange County Fire Authority, our contract fire. 7.1 million expenses that you would have seen here within the retaining firefighters and retaining police officers category. Those are actually reduced by 7 million as a result of CARES Act spending. So those dollars were actually spent out of another fund, and which is available for, as Director Downs mentioned. As a result, we increased our additions to reserves in the prior fiscal year. However, we're proposing the city council to augment that addition to reserves by ballot category for some additional items in the current year. So that's really a positive impact of receiving federal dollars. So basically the city has spent less of its own and used other sources or federal monies to offset some of its expenditures related to public safety. But as we go through here, I think this is really the key point for, as we've heard a lot of discussion, how to, we tackled a lot of ways that how to present this. And I think really we landed at this point here is to reflect what exactly is the spend for Measurex revenue to date since 2018-19 through the current year. So it's an eye-popping number. When you kind of look at these numbers and you're really just in tune with this, it was whopping. To see that the city has received $150 million in revenues related to Measurex in the past. I say 2 1/4 years. If everyone recalls, the city was received in 18-19 3 months of Measurex revenue. That's why we're reporting about that $13.6 million. But overall, since 18-19, $150.5 million the city has received versus an actual expense of checks cut of approximately $124.1 million. And in addition, $26.5 million in addition to reserves to kind of offset that total spend of $150.6 million. This exhibit 2 reflects it by individual line item, what those expenditures are attributed to. Next page, please. And again, as noted earlier, exhibit 1, this is really the meat and potatoes of the current fiscal year, where we outline by ballot category what the expenditures were for the fiscal year. So I just wanted to highlight a few expenses I think that are important. Really, that what exactly were these dollars going to? So I'd like to indicate here on park security contract, $600,000 in the current year was spent, and that's really where there was, I wouldn't say there was a lack of security, but there was enhanced security at our parks, longer hours, especially now that, due to COVID, a lot of folks are attending our parks and so forth. So we're seeing that we're trying to complement that increased service that will provide an increased security. Police department overtime, obviously for various issues or encounters, that's going to fund it up approximately $1.5 million. And the funding for additional police officers, that was 18 police officers that were funded in the last fiscal year as a result of Measurex, and some back office support to get those police officers out on the streets in order to provide that public safety for the community. And also $800,000 for those specialized units within the police department to go ahead and enhance our existing public safety net. Orange OCFA, our contract with our fire service projected, it's a little lower this year. It's about $2 million when we compare it to their base year. And again, the reason for that was that increase or that available funding that we use to offset those expenses from the CARES Act. And I think that one other item I do want to point out here is our public safety response related to homelessness. So, homeless is still an issue within the city, and what the police department has done for us is really they took a percentage amount of calls in the current year, and they divided that by the total number of calls, and this is really what they came out with as their response, if you will, labor-wise, for approximately 6.7 million initiatives to address homelessness. And there's also some contractual and other related items that goes towards their homeless efforts as well. So that's a really big contribution by our public safety department, specifically our police department. And finally, the park facilities. I think that's a great number here, and within the ballot category, maintaining our parks. So really, what our Parks and Rec department has advised is they hired folks, park maintenance staff, to our various park facilities, but also try to do a lot of cleanup work as well within those park facilities as well, hiring contractors, providing that increased services, but more than just the paint, but trying to, little by little over time. Just as a reminder, the city's parks are also funded through our cannabis funding as well. So this is just one portion, or specifically the Measurex portion related to park facilities. Next page, please. And again, as I probably mentioned, this is our unrestricted general revenue purpose category of $23.8 million. Again, this is mainly attributed to our budget deficits in the base year or 18-19 as well, but also that those incentives for our businesses, as noted there, for sales tax rebate, and also some our funding for our regional transportation center at the Santa Ana Regional Transportation Center. Next page, please. Exhibit 2 is really the detail, and again by category. Pardon me. This is the summary by ballot category of the expenditures. But Exhibit 2 is really where we see the year-over-year comparison from 18-19 to 2021, and I'm happy to report. I think really the city staff, not just obviously in the finance firm, but really our departments as a whole, they've worked diligently to really ensure that those expenditures that are going towards Measurex funding in here. So I think really for the ballot categories, if you will, the total for all fiscal years is about $58.4 million. That really is intuitive of really identifying what are the increased service levels in the various departments as well. The biggest categories you could see is obviously maintaining that effective 911 response, but also really are continuing to address those homeless issues within our community. Next page, please. And overall, our general revenue purpose, again, our largest category. Really, what I'm really big takeaway from me here is we're seeing that increase in expenditure rather than just kind of maybe like the catch-all pot, if you will. In 1920, it was 28 million. It's actually been reduced to 24 million. However, that spend is really going directly towards those ballot categories indicated in that previous page. and reflecting that $124 million in total spend for Measurex for the last 3 fiscal years. And finally, the addition to reserves, the city, as a result of Measurex, $26 million has gone towards reserves. Obviously, as our revenues have gone up, that requirement, as Director Downs has mentioned, of maintaining that 18% of its operating revenues, that has gone to going ahead and supplanting that or ensuring that the city maintains that reserve requirement. That completes my portion of my presentation, but I'm now happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
All right, excellent, thank you. Let's do our normal walk around here, and I'll start in, I think, the same order that I've been doing. So that would be Member Perea first.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. Sergio, I have a couple of questions and more for clarification from my end. So one, I see two items in maintaining effective 9/11 response. One has to do with cost of POA contract increase, and then the other one around retaining police officers, around employee pension contribution increase. Can you explain to me a little bit what's the difference between both of them? Are both related to POA contract or the police department? And what's it specifically? Yeah.
Great. So I think two questions, if I could just clarify, is one was the public safety salary and related benefits, and then the other question was employee pension contribution increase for our safety plan. Correct, committee member Perea? So yes, correct. Okay. No problem. So the public safety salary, that's related to our labor contracts with our police department. So that's reflected there. And I believe you're indicating that 1.5 billion as of June 30th, 21. Again, that was offset by some of that CARES Act funding. So those are the contractual increases, if you will, when we compare it to fiscal year 18-19 to the current year 2021. So that includes not only salary but the related benefits. In relation to our pension and contribution increase, it's also related. Obviously, the higher the salary you have, the higher contribution towards your pension if it would go to. So inherently, a component of that increase is definitely the increase in salary, but also the increase in CalPERS costs, which is also it's attributed not just to salary, but also how CalPERS has performed in its portfolio. So, and they've also done some other additional items as well. One way we tackled that, which you'll be seeing in the upcoming fiscal year, or the current fiscal year, is the city undertook a pension debt refinancing, where we're anticipating reducing our pension contribution costs. So going forward, the assumption is the city will have a lower pension costs related to the safety program as a result of that refinancing and other items, and hopefully a continuing strong performance by CalPERS, which is also a huge driver of the cost related to pension.
And those negotiations with the CalPERS cost is something that the city is also hoping will decrease the projected fiscal deficit, right? That I think that was thrown out there.
Yes. So as our revenues continue to increase, we hope to reduce that budget gap of 12.6 where we came in. Obviously, as we anticipate strongly that we're going to have that Measurex revenue to come in to address mostly a majority of that budget gap. But yeah, that definitely will go ahead and contribute toward reducing what we use for our reserves in order to fund any labor agreements with city employees.
My other question is there any way that, and I appreciate the breakdown by category. I think that it's important for us to see where the dollars were spent. Is that also possible to the breakdown, in addition to by category, by department, where money is going by department from Measurex?
We could, yeah, we could. You mean in terms of the schedule, like Exhibit 1, for example, where we provided by ballot category, but also provided to the committee for my department.
Yeah, so for example, how much percentage is going, because I know there's different items, different categories here, those different services, but I think what will be helpful also just to paint a larger picture to residents is in terms of how much percentage is going to the police department, for example, how much percentage is going to the Parks and Rec department. And so I think that type of classification might give a surface level kind of like outlook as well to residents, kind of like a pie chart type of thing.
We're happy to provide that as supplemental information to you, and we can look at adding it into next year's report. This report had already been finalized and has already been, the agreed upon procedures performed by our independent auditors. So we don't want to modify this particular report for the year ended June 30th, 21, but we can certainly provide the supplemental information to you for that period. And then what we can do is look at including it in our June 30th, 22 report. So an additional schedule that would resort the information by department.
Yeah, thank you, Director Downs. And then just a general comment with that. I think I mentioned in the past meeting as well. Every time I go to the city website, there's in the budget section, pull all the documents and all that's great. But you really have to like click on them and go and dig deeper into scrolling down and go into the documents to really find out the numbers. So I'm wondering if there is like a possibility in the landing budget page to, not just put forward like Measurex expenditures in those some type of infographic way, but also the general budget as well. Just some comments that, I think it does take a lot of going deeper to get familiar with these numbers for someone that is a resident that might just want to see like what's the general numbers, what's the general like allocation of funds without having to go deeper into documents. I think that is something that will be more accessible.
Yeah, I appreciate your comment for sure. That is kind of an interesting struggle though, because there is so much information. So what pieces and parts do I pluck? Maybe I pluck pieces that make you happy, but maybe Member Lewis wants to see some different things. And then all of a sudden I'm crowding up a web page. So that's interesting. Let me think about that to see how we could even handle such a thing. Although, have you tried using our data tool? It's like the open checkbook tool. It's actually got all the revenues and expenditures on there, and you can visualize and drill down without like opening up PDF documents. It's actually kind of more of an interactive tool. Have you used that, the open book?
Yes, I often go to that one.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Those are my comments for now.
Okay, thanks, Carlos. Member Cargosian?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so looking at that report, I see some stuff in there and I kind of feel like a broken record when, we're talking about a lot of these things present as one-time expenses, but I don't think that they are. And like an example is like the park maintenance. I think that's the park security. I think that's a great addition, like as a resident who lives near two parks that are attached to two schools, an elementary school and a middle school. I see the park security. I know it's a contractor, but it's a vehicle with like the city logo on there. They're present. I see them. I walk the parks, I walk around, I drive around, I see them all the time. So I wonder, like, that's presenting as like a one-time expense. So when the sales tax sunsets, how are we going to pay for that? So these are the things that I kind of worry about.
Yeah, these are not presented as one-time expenses. These are all recurring expenses on this particular chart here that we were just reviewing. Okay. And you're absolutely right. When Measurex sunsets, we've got a real problem, which is why Sergio and I have been working towards pushing things, these items that are identified on the schedules that are in your annual report. We've been working on pushing those things into, separate accounting units because there's going to come a day where somebody, and that's going to be the city council, is going to have to make some very tough decisions about what to do when a big chunk of their revenue goes away. And those will be the first programs that they look to.
Yeah, and it's good stuff that we want to keep. Like, I think we're going to be staying with some of this technology that came about with public meetings because of the pandemic. And again, I saw that had come up, and that's a continual cost. So yeah, there's some concern about some of this stuff. But what was my other note on? I had one more question. Maybe I'll bring it back up in the general comments when it comes up. That's all for now.
We can wrap back around. You also,
yeah.
Member Lewis.
I had the same question that Member Cargosian has, so thank you for asking it. But I do have another question, just for my own information. What is the vehicle incentive program?
A $500 rebate for our residents who purchase a vehicle in Santa Ana.
Okay, and is that something that is temporary or permanent? Or
Temporary.
temporary?
That one is a temporary one.
Okay, okay. And then the sale, I noticed that there was sales tax incentive for Volvo and another company. What is that?
Those, did you want to answer that, Sergio?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah, it's the tough one to answer.
Well, I get that.
It's an economic development tool of yesteryear. It's not so much used anymore. And that economic development tool was to incentivize businesses to come to your city and generate jobs and other forms of tax revenue if you give back some of the sales tax that they generate. And so we have those two contracts. It's not something that's used a lot going forward. And in fact, there's been state law that's been put in since then to kind of, it makes it more difficult to use that kind of economic development tool, because the theory is you're stealing sales tax from another city.
Thank you. Those are my comments and questions.
All right, excellent. Member Lugo.
Hi, this is Alonzo. No questions. Thank you.
All right, excellent. And Vice Chair Landaverde.
Yes. So I just have, can you, Sergio, again clarify? I know you brought up like the addressing the homeless, one of the line items. I believe it's the homelessness, the labor. Can you explain again what that was? Is that if there's like a issue or disturbance, is that when the police comes in, and is that the expense that it's for? Oh, okay.
Yeah, great question. And just to answer your question, Committee Member Landaverde, is yes. So the police department took a percentage of homeless related calls, homeless response calls, if you will, and divided that by the total calls during the fiscal year to arrive at that number of their response or their efforts related to homelessness.
Okay, thank you. That's huge, but
You're
good
welcome.
to know. And then just a comment. I don't know if I'm being nitpicky or if I just missed it, but on page 3, that chart that you have at the end, it says total collected FY 2019-20. Is that correct, or is that right, or is that, or am I just being like?
That's a good catch. It should say 2021.
Okay, just wanted to make sure and let you guys know, because I was like, I don't know if I'm missing something, but I noticed that 2021 and 2022 or 2020 it was a completely different number. So
Thank you. And that's something we can definitely fix before we upload it to the website.
Awesome. All right, thank you.
Perfect, thanks. I'm gonna have Landaverde proofread all my stuff in the future.
Attention to detail.
This report, I mean, I know that it probably feels like you're putting the same information like 4 different ways, but I really appreciate it. And so I want to make sure that I understand though, like the especially the per year analysis. So we're using a baseline. That's what we've switched to? Is that right? We're using a baseline and then increase over the baseline of like pre-Measurex. I think that'd be like 18, 19. Is that how we're determining these costs?
Yeah, so again, the methodology behind the Measurex spending is comparing the base year, which is or the current year versus the base year. So the current year 2021 versus 18, 19.
Okay.
So we've identified like the big ticket items such as our increases in contractual increases, Orange County Fire, CalPERS, and some other programs, some big ticket programs, but then also analyzing the cost centers, if you will, that the expenditure increase from the base year to the current year.
Is the additions to reserves, is that kind of essentially, I mean, us accountants, we don't ever plug anything, but is that the calculated amount on kind of the schedule?
Yeah, you could call it a calculated plug, but there is a real big correlation to how we see our reserves grow. So for example, this current year budget, the 21-22 budget, was originally adopted with a use of 12.6 million of the general fund reserve. You might notice that correlates very heavily to the 19-20 actual contribution to the reserve of 12.785. And that's exactly where that money came from.
And is that, is there any, we just happen to be right, kind of flirting, plus or minus 18%. And that also on the reserve, which, it would correlate to our reserve policy. Is that, so I mean, are those kind of all interrelated, Kat, to where, or is it just kind of a check and balance of like, hey, does this make sense, type of a thing?
Both. In answer to your question, really, the answer is yes to both.
Okay. All right. The only other thing that, and obviously no change involved, but I think Member Cargosian brought up the one-time versus recurring type expenditures. I know that we've had some reports that kind of break it out in those manners, and obviously there's a lot of detail on here, and us accountants love to just splash up a bunch of numbers on pages, but I think that might be helpful, especially as we get closer to talking about a wind down, or the sunset type period, to where we can, especially to Member Pereira's point on contractual obligations in the public safety sector and some of those types of things. And Kat, you've referenced a couple of times in terms of, hey, this is all service levels, and what's going to happen there. So kind of maybe keeping the emphasis on providing some detail in terms of a recurring versus one time. And some of these you can kind of tell, but some of them are maybe not. But I think it's it's very informative to me. I appreciate the level of detail that went into this, as well as the methodology. I think we've evolved quite a bit in the last couple of years providing this information. So great job. Member Cargosian, I think you were trying to remember another question you may have had. Did it come to you?
I did. I don't know if this is the right time to ask it or if I should wait till the general portion, but I'll just ask it. I remember during the budget process, this oversight committee had an opportunity to put forth recommendations. Do we get that same opportunity during mid-year?
For your March meeting, that's when you're scheduled to develop your recommendations for the 22-23 budget process. The mid-year report goes to City Council in currently scheduled for February 15th.
Okay.
And just as a reminder, even though we're all a group here, but any one of us individually can always make any type of comments to our city council. Just because we are on this group doesn't mean that we can't speak our own mind to the council during any public meeting also.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I encourage you when the December 21st report is published, I believe on December 16th. Well, actually, yeah, I guess December 16th is likely when it's going to be published. I encourage you to go read it. There's a lot of good information in it. It is as robust or more robust than our mid-year reports usually are.
Excellent. Okay, well, I think that unless I'm Sergio or Director Downs, if unless I've missed anything, I think that brings our regular business calendar to a close. Staff, do you guys have anything you would like to say?
I don't have anything, Sergio. Do you?
I don't have anything for the committee this evening. Thank you for allowing me to do that.
All right, excellent. And so then this will be the time that we, the members can make all of our comments, as well as maybe if we have something that we want to get on a future agenda, this might be a good time to kind of bring that up with Sergio and Kat also. So we'll go in kind of our same order of Member Correa.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I forgot to ask this earlier, but this is probably also a question or a comment for the chief. But you know, the resident that called earlier brought something very interesting around wage theft enforcement. So I'm kind of wondering if that falls within the jurisdiction of the police department, or if there's like mechanisms in place to do some type of reports or claims. I'm not very familiar with this, but I thought it was very, very, very interesting. As well, if there's any like studies out there about economic impacts of wage theft. I think that's probably something that is very that is worth for us to look into in the future. And then just my general comments is as we're thinking about sunsetting this tax measure, ensuring that it's a smooth transition, but also oftentimes programs like youth programs and other types of non-safety programs, they tend to take a hit first. And so I think that is something that we should continue to monitor as a committee, ensuring that the services that are most protected are those that are preventative, in order for us to also include that into our safety determination. But yeah, that's all my comments.
Excellent, thank you for that. Member Cargosian.
Well, thank you to you, Chair Johnson, for encouraging us to reach out to the city council member with our personal opinions. Just kind of, I guess, like a logistical question. If we do that, should we identify ourselves as members of this committee or just as individuals?
What I found works best in the past, just to make sure that you don't step on any toes or whatever, is just to say, my name is Lori Cargosian, and I am a member of the Measurex Citizen Oversight Committee, but I'm here speaking on my own personal behalf tonight. Just making that clarification.
So I'll do that. And also with the public comment that we had tonight, it was interesting, and I was kind of racking my brain about that, is this something within our purview? But I keep coming back to how the purpose of the sales tax was presented to the voters, and the parameters that were kind of laid out. And it was a bit difficult for me to figure out, does this fit in there? And the conclusion that I came up with was that it's a little bit out of what was presented to the voters. So I don't believe that it's something, while it is interesting and worthwhile to kind of have that looked at, I don't think that we can do that with sales tax money. And then because we were asked by Chair Johnson to share if we have any ideas for maybe presentations for the coming year. I know the city put together a sustainability plan, and I kind of looked at that loosely, and I wonder if I might take a second glance at that, but if there are any one-time expenses or projects in there that maybe in the new fiscal year we could dedicate some funds to, that might be something that we could maybe have a presentation on, if you guys all agree. And then I know last night the council, I haven't had a chance to go back and watch the meeting, but I think there was an item on there where they were discussing the urban forest plan for our city. And I think that was kind of tied to the sustainability plan as well. And, you know, although planting trees sounds like a one-time expense, I know there's maintenance costs that are recurring and ongoing that are tied to that too. But that's another idea that I had as well, that we can maybe look at the outcome of the what the city's urban forest plan is going to be looking like going forward as well. That's about it for me for tonight. Great meeting. Loved all the presentations.
Excellent, thank you. Member Lewis?
No additional comments for me. Thank you for the presentations.
Perfect, and Member Lugo? Oh, Alonzo, I think you're, go ahead. Oh boy, we still can't hear you, yeah.
Nope.
So Alonzo, I think you're maybe muted on your actual device and not through Zoom. All right. Well, while we try to figure that one out, we'll go on to Vice Chair Landaverde.
I don't have any additional comments. Just thank you to everyone. And then for your usual that you guys do all this hard work. I know we ask sometimes for a lot and you guys are working hard for us. So we do appreciate it, even though we don't see it every day or talk to you guys every day, but thank you so much.
Perfect. Yeah, I want to reiterate that you know, very helpful information, and you know, appreciate your group's dedication to this and providing us and more importantly the public this information. You know, in terms, I think I wouldn't mind maybe kind of getting an update and kind of following off of Member Pereira's information on some of the public safety. Maybe getting a little update in terms of I know the last time they came in, they chatted on you know, response times and some of those maybe I think that they made a big deal about the and rightfully so, the you know, the hiring and retirements and the pluses and minuses, and maybe kind of getting a little bit of an update from our police department, public safety, on maybe some of those metrics that they were, I think, really trying to look at Measurex funding to be able to help, and maybe also correlate into something that I think relatively recently happened in terms of when the council, I think, made it a somewhat of a goal and funded some additional city net funding to where they would be able to provide more mental health calls and homeless response calls that would be maybe more appropriately for someone specifically trained to be able to address that, as opposed to our public safety officers that maybe they, you know, obviously I think as member or Vice Chair Landaverde had brought up, that's a pretty large dollar amount that, you know, is being devoted to you know, our police department devoted to homeless calls, and seeing what their expectation is and if they've had any you know, actually anything to I guess at that point it'll be another 3 months down the line, so they might actually have something to report on that. But I think that would be because it especially because it crosses over two major ballot language items with both public safety as well as homeless response. I'll put mental health as an implied one in there also. But Alonzo, are you able to hear us now?
I could definitely hear you. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you, Chair. A quick question for Director Downs. In the past, we had talked about how the accounting lines are being identified and tagged, and there was a mention of an effort to put a designation upon funds for Measurex. How has that come to fruition? How
Yeah.
are we doing with that?
Yeah, we have pushed a lot of those expenditures into these new programs that are specifically identified as Measurex funded accounting units, if you will.
Wonderful to hear. I'm happy to hear that. I haven't had an opportunity to see the data, but I'll definitely dig into it to take a look at that. And one last question. Regarding the recommendations that are going to go to the city council on behalf of the Measurex funds, have they been shared with the Measurex committee?
Oh, you mean the recommendations that we're going to make in the December 21st report?
Yes.
No, they have not. These are really things that the city council has discussed from the dais, and recommendations from staff. And so ultimately it will be up to the city council to decide, since it's their budget. But no, we have not done any vetting with this committee as far as what those recommendations might be. Again, we're trying to make recommendations that are as much in line with the ballot measure categories as we can. So let me take a quick peek here so I can give you some more examples.
I appreciate that. I think, the quality of life ballot measures language that was part of the ballot is my area of focus. You had mentioned parks and homelessness. I'm just curious to see what other recommendations are being proposed.
And again, this isn't final, so I don't know what's going to end up being finalized in the report, because the city manager has a whole lot more detailed information about what the city council wishes to come forward, so that she can get some some support across the city council. But the one of them, you may remember that the city council had a little while back had decided not to sell the Cypress Fire Station, which is in a very dilapidated condition. And they were talking about things like, maybe we could use it for the PAL program. Maybe we could use it for library services. There were several different things that were floated from the dais. So that's on our recommendation list, to repurpose that building for such a program. And such a program would certainly fall into youth services. And then we also have, let's see, a lot of good items on here. We also have recommendations for an ongoing sidewalk program, an ongoing traffic calming program, an ongoing alley improvement program, enhancements to graffiti removal, protected bike lane sweeping. So there's quite a few things, more deferred park maintenance projects. There's quite a few things on our list here that line up very nicely with the ballot language. So we really are trying to make sure that that additional 10 million or so that was added to the general fund balance from the last year's Measurex money really does get spent for things that fit the ballot language.
I understand. And you mentioned the majority of those recommendations are one-time services or one-time expenses?
Yes, the majority of them are. I did share some of the ongoing with you because, as I mentioned, there is a little bit of a flip going on. So our original adopted budget was to use 12.6 million of general fund balance. With the updated revenue estimates, it swings a little bit the other way. So it frees up a little bit for some ongoing programs, and the ones that I listed off are very much needed.
Thank you, Director.
All right. Well, that's great. Glad that Alonzo, you were able to get to where we could hear you. That's great. All right. Well, I think that is that's it. Unless anyone, I'm not seeing anyone wave their hand or anything like that. So, unless there's any objection, I would adjourn to our next regularly scheduled meeting, which is on March 9th of next year at 6 o'clock. And I know that the council has to continue to do some items in terms of whether it can be virtual or in person. And so we'll see how that goes. I kind of felt like after our last meeting that this group was perfectly fine on virtual if possible, but so we'll just have to stay tuned in terms of how we will be doing our next meeting on March 9th. So I think that is it, unless anyone else has anything. So, all right, I think
Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Happy
Bye.
holidays. Thank you.
Happy holidays.